recording. And just some quick housekeeping announcements. Mentor for those who are participating in the Protothon, mentor contact info has been sent out, and so be sure to contact your mentor as soon as possible or when convenient. And so some important links that we'll be able to find is if you'd like to see the schedule, go to tinyurl.com fall 20 pbpj, tinyurl.com for pbpj essentials for some essential documents and information. And feel free to share your key takeaways on LinkedIn, and feel free to tag us and the speaker, Andrew. And you can also find us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Product Buds, and on LinkedIn at the Product Buds site. And be sure to have fun. And I'd love to turn it over to Andrew now.
Thanks so much, David. Yeah, appreciate Product Buds in the community here, and just excited to share some of our experience in solution validation, how we've used prototypes to test out business ideas, applications, and all of those things. So as David said, Andrew Verboncouer, partner and CEO at Headway. My background is in design. Had really the fortunate, I guess, luxury over the last 15, 16 years to be able to kind of wear a hat in design, wear a hat in product management, and also contribute as a developer on certain projects throughout the different startups and things that I've been involved in. So hopefully can bring that perspective of all kind of the holy trinity of product design and development together to you today, and how we can use prototypes to test and build and validate. As David mentioned, we launch and grow new digital products with less risk at Headway. That's a big part of that is through prototyping. So excited to talk more about that, where you kind of take an idea, build it, grow it, and transform that in a market. All right, so let's get started with prototypes. Yesterday, Cheryl talked a little bit about prototypes. There was a question, and I think everybody looks at MVPs and prototypes a little bit differently. But one of the things that we kind of believe in is all prototypes are MVPs. Not all MVPs are prototypes, meaning you can have a version 1 of your product that is more minimal, but still really a learning tool. And then as we kind of build upon that, an MVP is a prototype with minimum functionality that facilitates learning. So the whole goal is understanding what you need to learn, when you need to learn it. And prototypes are tools that are going to help you communicate your idea, the value you provide, and really learn from that, as I mentioned. So they're helping you to tell a story, use something tangible with visuals to explain your intent. Kind of this framework that we like to think about. If you're only to explain your idea or value to a customer, there's kind of 4 conversations that happen. There's what you said, what you thought you said, what they heard, and what they thought they heard. And so using these prototypes and kind of taking out the mental model and presenting something physical for somebody helps them to understand how it might help them, helps them to understand, what's their perception? What is this similar to? How is this different than the things I'm using now? And all of those different perspectives can help you start to understand how your idea has a position in the market. You can best learn with prototypes by getting out of the building. In this case, it's going to be through Zoom and other digital tools. So getting out of the building is a saying that a lot of folks in lean startup use to be able to go talk to real customers. Get out of your own head, get out of your team's head, get your assumptions out in the wild and talk to people. And so a big part of that is putting real enough things in front of users. And real enough depends on who your users are and what types of experiences they're familiar with and accustomed to. So for B2B, enterprise software, it's a definitely different feel, different sales process, different buying process, different stakeholders that you have to answer to. So a prototype in that realm might look much more sophisticated, much more high fidelity than going to somebody about a cat sitting app, right? Your target market is going to help determine what level of prototype you need to ultimately gain traction in validation with it. So the next question we come to is, how real should it be? So there's kind of this time versus realness factor that we like to think about things in, where you want it to be real enough to test, but you don't want to put all the effort in to actually launch a real thing or the full version of your product. So it's kind of this Goldilocks zone, as I mentioned, where we're trying to get into with the different prototypes that we create and how we can leverage it. So one of the things, and I've kind of pinned apart a few different types of prototypes that you can create here, and we'll go over examples of these later in a little bit on, what tools can you use, links to tools that are out there. How can you take your idea and then make it real? So you can see here this sketch and wireframe. It's real enough to test in that you can get feedback. It won't really feel like a real app unless you put a lot of time in polishing it, but you can actually get that in front of somebody to learn. It can be a napkin sketch. It can be, and there's actually some tools we'll talk about on how to take your sketches on paper and actually make them into clickable prototypes so you can learn that way as well. The next thing is building a real product. You see here, there's a huge curve in the amount of time it takes for you to learn or for you to actually build it and for it to be real, and just a little bit of gain at the end here where it's real enough to test, and you can test right before you launch. And so you see a lot of beta folks launch here and try to learn. When you build a prototype, and this is more referring to a clickable prototype where you can get in front of users, you haven't built anything yet, there's no, there isn't this wall of investment or wall of resources or time into it, but yet it's real enough where somebody could believe it's a real app, they can understand how it might help them, and really, be able to give you actionable feedback on that. The other one here is kind of like splitting the two and using no-code tools, where it might take a little bit more time than a clickable prototype, but it's a lot more real and it's a lot faster to be able to get to launch than traditional development. And so as we take a look at all of these, we have sketches and wireframes, we have these clickable prototypes, we have no code kind of in the middle, and then a functioning product. And that's exaggerated. Obviously, you could build a functioning product in a weekend if you had a small enough feature set, but really just to, there's a lot of technical debt that can happen when you launch a real product, and it's very hard to adjust quickly. And so that's kind of factored in this timeline as well. So the next thing is really going into, what tools can you use to create your prototypes. So that first one we talked about, sketches and wireframes. So anybody can draw. You can leverage this prototyping on paper to be able to basically take photos of your mobile prototypes that you've sketched and link them together so you can actually use them on a device. You can upload web-based photos of app sketches and connect together flows in Figma. So if you had a web application idea or that was your solution, you could be able to scan those in and drop those in Figma and be able to link those together into a flow. Or you can use Whimsical's wireframing tools, which are pretty straightforward. They have a good base of templates that you can use, and we'll just talk about each one really quickly. So you can see here, if you had an enterprise app that was going to solve all of healthcare's problems, and you went to a healthcare system trying to validate if they wanted it, the sketch probably isn't going to convince anybody. Like they're probably going to have concerns about compliance and safety and HIPAA, PHI, all of these different concerns around how the data is going to be stored. But you can go to somebody, with Snapchat and chat with cats, and this is an example of someone's sketch that they used for prototyping out on paper. The next one I mentioned is Figma. You can see here it looks and feels a lot more real. And we'll talk about this a little bit when we get to real prototypes, but really the idea here is that you'd be able to take photos the same way you would in prototyping on paper, but of web applications, and be able to stitch those together. The other one here, which is really straightforward, these are two templates that they give you out of the gate, but you can see how you would, if you had an idea for a web application, how you would use, and this is a pretty good WYSIWYG builder, drag and drop, either for web or for mobile. You can kind of get a good feel for how those are. There is a level of fidelity here that you can't get with Whimsical. If there are any designers here, you can design a lot of these things, same types of wireframes in Figma, and then push the level of fidelity in those. But if you're not super technical or Figma's super intimidating, you can prototype out your ideas and flows here. The caveat with Whimsical is you can't actually connect them together, so it makes it difficult to have somebody walk through your app if you're doing usability testing. If you're kind of handing the keys over to them, you would have to guide them or really give them access to a full canvas. So building a real bespoke, I added bespoke product because no code products are real. And we'll talk about that shortly here, but like it would involve hiring a developer, finding technical co-founders, you kind of guess what to build. If you go straight for the build, you spend weeks and months building, and there's really infinite amount of options and tools and frameworks and languages that you could use. So we aren't going to cover that for this session, but if you have questions about that, or feel free to reach out to me or drop them in there. Happy to talk more. The next step here is building a high fidelity prototype. So you can use free tools. Figma's free for 3 projects. You can get in there and be able to build something that's really feels beautiful with some of the templates and tools that we'll go over. Webflow, you can build website and landing pages that help you test whether or not your value proposition and your messaging is resonating with your users. And then also, connect that with other tools that we'll do surveys or forms or things that help you gather data. High fidelity could also be an app, so you could also be an app design. And with Figma, we'll talk about shortly, you can find UI kits and really adapt them for your use case. So you don't have to build it from the ground up, especially since time is sparse. You can find out, hey, what's close enough to your idea that you can adjust colors, adjust kind of messaging and things like that. And there is some barrier and learning curve. High fidelity prototype, it could also be a real product here with Bubble, and that's one of the big no-code tools that a lot of startups have used, both early stage bootstrap startups, and also I think I saw one that they were promoting that Dividend is a financial firm that raised 345 million, and their code is entirely, or their app is entirely built on Bubble. So you can reach venture stage using some of these tools. So the first one here that we'll talk about is Figma community. So, using Figma, there's a lot of resources and things that you can download and have that jumping off point, whether that's wireframes, whether that's iOS kits if you have an app. Really, this is drag and drop, and there are some nuances to it, but if you're really focusing on pushing the fidelity, here's a great starting point. I'll also plug our team at Headway invests in design systems and building UI kits. So we have a shipwright UI kit that you can drag and drop, and we have like an email UI here that you're able to edit and tweak and form into either a mobile app or a web app. But there's a lot of kits out there like this that the community contributes back, and you can just go in there and pull them down. They're 100% free. As far as I know, none of them are paid. So a really good option if you're more technical or more comfortable with design tools to be able to get in and leverage those. Webflow, if people haven't heard of it, there's a lot of companies that are using it, not only for websites, but also for lightweight applications. You can use Webflow with tools like MemberStack. If let's say your idea for serving value was a community, you'd be able to use MemberStack to have a login on a Webflow site, to accept payments through Stripe, to be able to really push the envelope of what you can validate kind of with those 2 technologies. And then the other one, so no-code apps built on Bubble, they have a showcase for you to see what's possible with Bubble, and this is a drag and drop builder. It can get more complex. I mentioned the learning curve can be a little bit larger for Bubble, especially as you get to more advanced stuff. If you're just building a marketing site or something to test, landing page conversion rates, click-throughs, all of those things, you'd be able to use this fairly easily, and they have some templates that you can use as a starting point as well. All right, some more no-code tools. So we talked a little bit about Webflow. We talked about Bubble. There's 2 more here that I thought were worth mentioning, depending on how comfortable folks were with some of these tools. So using no-code tools, you can test perception. You can really get a good feel for what a product might look like, might feel like. There's that realness factor to it. You can test user-generated content and profiles. So a lot of companies are built on kind of the assumption that people will give you the data that makes it valuable. So networks, multiple-sided marketplaces, this is really important. Can you start to attract those folks onto your app, and will they give you the information you need? So you can build forms that do that. You can also do that with like Typeform. You can build forms with SurveyMonkey, Typeform, any of those really that help you gather data and actually measure behavior. And we'll talk about kind of this engagement loop and how you would measure the effectiveness of these prototypes and really start to build those engagement funnels. So we'll talk a little bit about Bravo here. And Bravo is essentially a no-code tool that allows you to sync a Figma artboard and project to Bravo, and they turn it into a real app, and you can connect it to, Airtable, which is a database tool. You can connect it into Google Sheets. If you had a developer or you are a developer kind of making a transition, you could write your own API that feeds the data in. But this really gives you the ability to push to App Store and Google Play, just by designing it and a little bit of tweaks in the code for setting variables, not tweaks in the code, tweaks in Bravo's UI to be able to set variables and launch something without, the back and forth of building an app. The other one here is really testing value props by using Google Sheets to drive your data, and then Glide actually pulls those into your prototypes, into your app, and that they serve it up as a web app, and so you pull it up in a mobile browser. The user would have to save it to screen, but in that case, if your app is built on delivering value through data, or let's say you had a Yelp-like application, you'd be able to create locations, you'd be able to upload that and sync that to Glide and kind of point and click what data you wanted where and be able to test that value prop. So I'll pause there. There's a lot of tools we talked about. I don't know if there's any questions or ones that we should go in deeper at this point.
I think one of the immediate questions that comes up is, are there kind of any ones that you would recommend for pricing related? A lot of people are students, so wondering which ones are free and which ones would you recommend that are free?
Yeah. Pop, as far as I know, is free to try. Like a lot of these are free for 1 to 3 different prototypes or projects. Figma is free for 3 projects, so you can create that and collaborate with other folks right in that for free. Whimsical, I believe, has that free. Let me just check real quick. They have free up to 4 different boards, so you can have 4 project types in there. So a lot of these are free. Obviously, if you're going to hire a developer, that would be the opposite of free. So Figma Webflow has a free version while you're in testing and staging. So as long as you don't integrate a custom domain, you can use Webflow for free. Same thing with Bubble, actually. So a lot of these are free to get started, and they have some good communities around them. Glide Apps, I believe, is free. Yeah, so it's free for 500 data rows, 100 megs of file storage. If you accept payments through your app on Glide, they have a 10% transaction fee. But other than that, it's totally free. And then it's a domain based on their domain. So a lot of the upgrades are based on, you removing the branding or some of those, which you might not need to.
Mm-hmm.
And Bravo is still in free beta, as far as I understand.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's super helpful, and I think that answers the question perfectly. And I guess kind of one more question that Vanessa asked is, do you have tips on doing effective mockups and prototypes for people without a design background?
Yeah, that's good. I would say, the big thing is trying to make your prototype clear by removing clutter, right? I think there's this, if Facebook started out as an example with the entire suite of products they have today, it'd be very hard for them to gain market traction because it would do everything for everybody. And there's actually a slide. I don't think that, yeah, actually a bunch of these. Hold on a second. Just one sec. Yeah, so I think, there we go. Yeah, less is more, definitely. I think like if you see apps that you like, I think a good thing for early designers is to try and, not steal layouts or things, but there are patterns that are best in the industry. So rather than creating your own patterns or ways of navigation, it's like following some common things that you've experienced or your target market has experienced. So if you're making a mobile app, mobile menus on the bottom, I think really try to simplify your UI to what the major value prop is or the main step. And one thing that's been proven if you're testing a main flow is that more steps are often better than less steps. So if you had an onboarding flow that you were testing and there was, let's say, 15 questions, it'd be better to have those 15 questions across 5 screens than all 15 on one screen and trying to cram it all in. So really trying to create focus for the user and then group things together. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think um, kind of, do you have time for one more question or would you like to move on?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think one more question that kind of stands out is which tool is the most commonly used in the industry?
I would say in the common is I, I would say like a lot of the companies we work with and our preference is Figma just based on how flexible it is. So working with a lot of teams with product managers, if you set up a system in an intuitive way, you can empower product managers to build with what feels like the real product in Figma because it's all connected. It basically uses a design library that keeps colors in sync, that keeps your branding in sync, that keeps components in sync. So you can't mess anything up unless you intentionally break it apart. So I would say Figma is kind of the de facto place where people are moving. Another big one that I didn't mention that a lot of companies use is Adobe XD, which does similar things, but is a little bit different as well. There are pros and cons to each, and I think early on you want to choose whatever's fastest for you to work with. So if it's super intimidating and you're going to be fighting the tool the whole time, it's going to be hard to learn fast enough and go through enough learning loops. So I would choose a tool that is kind of the right level for you where you get the level of polish you're looking for, but yeah, you can wireframe out enough flows and start to learn about how people perceive the product and the value that you're going to provide through it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That answers the majority of the questions in the chat, and we'll save some more for later on. And feel free to continue with the amazing presentation.
Yeah, sounds good. Let me just blaze through this quick. There was a section so this is built in Figma as well. So there was a section that we skipped in the beginning that I think is important here. Once we get to the end here, that's not it. Sorry, one sec. Let me. All right, almost there. Nope. Shoot. All right, hold on. Let me try and do this quick. I'm trying to find the option here. Sorry, let me reshare right quick. I promise it'll be worth it. Any more questions while I try to troubleshoot this quick?
Yeah, one of the questions that kind of popped up right near the end was why does Sketch not support Windows? If that is a question that you might know.
I don't know. Yeah, I think that's been part of their Achilles heel and what has gained so much traction for Figma is that they are a web-based tool. and there's more about their delivery and business model that's super interesting around how fast they can release updates to the community based on the technology that they use. But I think Sketch made a misstep there definitely, and I don't know. I don't know why they haven't supported Windows, especially since it had so much traction, the first few years coming from things like Photoshop and Illustrator, and gained a lot of ground that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if you have time for one more question, a lot of people in the chat have dropped this. Uh, so one of the questions I'm getting is, what are the advantages of using Figma versus XD and vice versa? If you kind of have some top of mind differences.
Yeah, to just kind of caveat that, I haven't used XD in a while. We've been kind of a Figma convert for the last 2.5 years or so, but some of our clients do use XD still. And so I think the biggest difference for us is really the end-to-end experience has been much better using Figma. We've been embedded in some teams that will use XD, and I think Figma, the way they do product management is really interesting, in that if you're a designer and you care about a lot of the nuance and there's a lot of things you kind of fight with tools over, what they've done, and they come up with releases every week, every month, that kind of answer these really small workflow things that a lot of companies that are building software like Sketch and Adobe XD, I think, is starting to focus on now. They miss that user context when you're, like, let's say changing the state of a button is something that Figma released recently. So they have all these different variants and how you would use things in real life. As far as the main difference, they're both tools. You can learn them, you can kind of answering for, we turn to Figma because we answer more for the designer and developer experience and how that's been. But either tool could speak well to your customers and your validation efforts. It's just when you start to get at a certain point at scale with certain efforts, and you have hundreds of people contributing to the same libraries and the same files, we found Figma to be easier to work with and fit more into the workflow.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I think
Yeah.
this is the section that you wanted to point out.
Yeah, this was supposed to be first, so I don't know how it wasn't linked up. But so I think a big thing in prototyping is this mindset of validated learning. And Monday we talked about, or in the group, Sana talked about, what problem are you solving for who, and really when we approach prototypes, we have to understand, what are we looking to learn. So what's the one thing we're looking to learn about our target market and the folks we look to serve? And then we ask, what's the best method and medium to learn it? And that's kind of based on this model of the lean startup methodology, where we build, measure, learn. So building could be an interview script. It could be, this is kind of back to the definition of MVP, like, what can you use to learn, in interviews, like definitely problem discovery, in sketches, in landing pages, in videos. Dropbox is a big success. They launched a landing page with a video, and I don't remember what the number was, 40,000 or 70,000 signups. They knew they were onto something. And that was their version of MVP. Is it was actually a video of somebody, their camera facing their desk. And I don't know if anyone remembers this, but they were shuffling cut out data blocks together between a computer and your device. And it was like this, they use that model to help communicate the value they would create, and that really resonated. But in this, we have to figure out, what's the right thing to build, and that fidelity, goes into it. And one thing is, like, don't avoid addressing risks. So a lot of companies and a lot of startups that fail end up spending a long time building, and not a lot of time talking with customers, or maybe a little bit of time at the beginning, and then kind of build it. As you use prototypes throughout the entire process of product management, of design, of development, like, address your highest risks always, and continually reduce the risk that you have, so you keep it minimal. So you're not building kind of this risk debt where it becomes this huge mountain that you have to try and overcome, or you and your friends, and I did this personally, spent 1.5 years building something. This was one of the first tech startups I was a part of. 1.5 years, we had a launch party, everybody was throwing high fives. We got back, the next day, we had like 10 signups, on our site. Oh, it'll be the next week. We didn't actually talk to any users. And so that kind of flipped the script for us on product development versus customer development in kind of this mindset. And then kind of back to what you said, David, or what the question was is, hey, what's the advice for prototyping? Like, figure out the one thing that's going to really help you provide value to somebody, and what's the reason they'll buy it versus a bunch of small bells and whistles that aren't really going to stand out. This is actually taken from not Dave McClure, Greg McCown's Essentialism on like, hey, you could focus on this 100 things and get the same traction with each, or you could focus on one thing and really push it forward. And so I think that's true for products as well. And then, prototypes are all about creating doors for customers to walk through. When in your problem discovery that you've done as part of what Sana said, as you're interviewing customers, as you're trying to identify problems, like how can you create this opportunity for them to take what they've said they would do or said they would buy, and like actually give them the opportunity to do it, and then measure that. And if they walk through one of these doors, figure out why, and if they don't, figure out why, and then that'll help you kind of learn and continue to de-risk. So, all right, still another, hold on. All right, so then we get to finding people to talk to. Like, how do we find people that are in our target market? How do we find people that we can start to to ask to take an action, whether that's for a landing page, whether that's for a beta sign up, whether that's for testing our application. And so a lot of places you can look here: personal network, relationships, friends, family, really looking for folks that from school, from anywhere, professional networks, meetups, Slack communities, people that you think have the problem that you've defined, and reach out to them. Say, hey, thinking about this, would love to chat with you about, this problem or the solution or what have you. People complaining is a great spot. Like, people feel the pain enough to take to Twitter or Reddit or Facebook groups or LinkedIn. So we find a lot of times they're motivated to talk to you just because they've taken the time to tweet, and in a lot of cases in Reddit and Facebook groups and even LinkedIn, multi-threads on their experience with something. Or so if you're looking up competitors, a good place to look up, if you find competitors in the App Store, look for bad reviews. Product Hunt, look for bad reviews on Product Hunt, or feedback or things that have died. Reach out to experts in proxies. And so like a proxy is just somebody who can amplify and speak on behalf of your end customers. So if you had somebody who was in your industry who then sunset their app, like, figure out why. Like, why did they fail? Was it the team? Was it their idea? Could they not get any traction? And try to use that to really learn. You can get samples of population through Facebook ads. You can use Respondent, which is paid. So I'd probably stay away from some of those for this, and really rely on some more of these more natural, organic views. And then also profile search. So trade show lists, associations, depending on what you're building, sponsors. And then you can find a lot of people through LinkedIn, which no one likes being spammed on LinkedIn. So I think what we found to be successful, especially as you're early on, is like, hey, you're reaching out to an expert or somebody that has this problem or said they had this problem. Like, hey, I'm starting to research this and wondering like if you have some time to talk to me. And a lot of people will say yes. I don't know if that'll be true from Friday to Sunday since it's a weekend, but just wanted to caveat that. So really, like, finding them is kind of you going out and hunting them. And then here, how do you attract folks? So free traffic or ads, a lot of times pushing that to a landing page, which then can incorporate a newsletter sign up, a paid offer. And then a lot of times in startups is a survey and data collection. And that could be in the form of a profile that a user is trying to create. That could be if you're creating, let's say, a task app that integrates all your apps together, you could gather data around what folks are using today, what tools are using today, and that might help steer your product roadmap based on some of the demand that you have. So yeah, you can push a lot of traffic to these landing pages. And the big thing there is this is all based on the work you did from the workshops from Monday and Tuesday. Did you identify the right person? Did you identify the problem enough? And can you actually target these people to then resonate? And you can write copy that resonates with them. So it all goes together, and will all be a part of you validating your solution. Because if you have if you have the best app and you can't reach, or you have the best idea and you're kind of looking a solution in search of a problem is what it's called. You have an app and you're trying to figure out who has the problem that they can use. It's usually backwards. So starting with the problem, starting with who has it, and then being able to attract them here. So the next part, and really the last part of this, is measuring validation and traction. So when you have a prototype, how do you measure whether or not it's any good, or the value prop you have is any good? And this is good advice from Dave McClure, who was a founder of 500 Startups and later Practical Venture Capital. But it's think like a pirate, and it's this model where you have R, which is why it's called think like a pirate. You have awareness, which is is your brand recognizable with your target audience? Does your reputation precede you? Like when you talk with people, oh yeah, I've heard of you, or I've heard, and that's later on. It's going to be very hard to test that now unless you're eye, mouth, eyes. I don't know if people saw that on Twitter a while back, or like things that kind of, yeah, anyway. The next one is acquisition, and you can look at this as like an engagement funnel. So when you do have a live app, a lot of times, in product management, what we'll do is create very granular events at each one of these, and then be able to track what users do or don't do, and then be able to re-engage them kind of along this funnel to make sure we're providing value. So acquisition, obtaining new users that sign up through early adopter forms, beta lists. Activation, once obtained, are they actually creating an account? Are they adding their content? Are they reaching their aha moment? So you really move the bar on that based on the value your app's trying to deliver to really consider a user activated. Retention, are customers coming back? If so, how much? What features are most used? What features are never used? It's going to be hard to test that with this prototype. Referral, are your customers creating customers for you? What's kind of your viral coefficient? If you have a viral coefficient of 1, that's considered better. That means everybody who comes brings a friend. And so if you can amplify that decreases your acquisition costs, that increases really the impact of your app and how fast you can grow. And then revenue, are people paying for your solution? How much? What's a customer's lifetime value? And that can be estimated. So a lot of times in apps, what we try to do is move this revenue test up sooner. So basically presenting a pre-launch offer. This is how Kickstarter is so successful. Like they try to acquire interest through videos, through those sort of things, and then give you the opportunity to pay, and you get a prize for it. But really, the prize or the reward for the pledge is really just the product or the thing that they're delivering in most cases, unless it's small. And so a lot of times, if it's a paid app, we'll try to do this as part of this validation test where we use a landing page with a prototype to then try and sell that before we even start building a product at all. And if we can't sell it and we have low conversions, we figure out why until we can iterate that into a healthy spot. So in this test and kind of going in the proto jam here, or the project jam rather, you really be able to test these 4 buckets. You're not gonna be able to test awareness unless you can get something to go super viral, on Twitter over the weekend. You're not gonna really be able to test retention. So acquisition, how would you test that, and how would you think about traction there? That would be, click-through rates. If you were running ads, there are some educational credits that I can look up for different things like Google ads, for Facebook ads. I don't know if David, you're familiar with any of those, or if they're still doing them. I know they were, but basically you can, test click-through rates on ads, and that's a good indicator of, is my messaging resonating with the people I'm reaching? So like, is this relevant to them or not? Landing page conversion rates. So if you set up a landing page in Webflow or in Bubble, or there's other tools like Card, it has 3 R's, where you can launch a single landing page. Of every 100 people that come, how many of them are actually registering and are interested? And that's gathering names and emails or phone numbers. There's a lot of SMS signups these days as well. Conversations. Hey, of the people you reach out to, how many of them are interested in talking with you? And then what's the conversion rate from, conversation to, to that next step. The next one here is activation. So surveys, will people give you data? If you have a network, if you have something about building profiles, if you're building a Yelp, like, can you get people's data from them. And so a lot of times you'll have a landing page that then follows up with like an automated email or something you can send a survey along and see like how many people that have signed up and converted will actually take the next step and vote with their time to fill out the survey and like say, hey, I believe in the value prop enough that you're saying I'm going to go ahead and engage in kind of the same thing with this profile completions. If you have, I've seen it a lot with networks where you have name, email, industry, things that your app would need to provide value through Google Forms or Typeform, things like that. The other one in referral would be, conversations. And if you don't have an app yet, it's hard to track that. But the way that we found it is, hey, if everyone you have a conversation with about your app and you're doing kind of some usability testing with, will they give you another name for somebody else? Like, hey, do you know anyone else who'd be excited about this? And, how can you measure that? Whether they would just give you an email or be able to forward you on to somebody. And then survey as well, like being able to any of these surveys or profile completions, like, hey, who do you think should know about this? Just to test that social factor. And that's really measuring, will they put their reputation on the line? Do they believe enough in this value prop that they'll tell other people about it, even at this infancy stage? And then from the revenue standpoint, a lot of times this is pre-launch offers. Will people pay now? Or, one thing that you can do with Stripe and other things is you commit now, but you don't actually pay until it actually launches. And Apple does these pre-offers now as well in the App Store, and so does Google. So you can start to test some of these pre-launch offers before something's live and out there. All right, so that was a lot. Hopefully that was helpful. And now if there are any questions, we can chat through them.
Yeah, of course. So first of all, thank you so much. A lot of people were just chatting throughout saying how amazing it was. And so if it's okay, I'll share my screen just so we can kind of get a little bit of the view of our questions. Yeah, so are you able to see my screen?
Yeah.
Absolutely. So first of all, the first question we've got is, and a lot of people actually ask this, is what is your webcam setup? It looks crisp.
Yeah, I get that a lot. It is it's a DSLR, so it's a Fujifilm X-T3 with a 35 millimeter lens, which gives it kind of the good depth of field. We use it a lot for webinars and trainings and things like that we do online. So appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's constantly through. Everyone's like, this looks like a what do you call it? A album cover. It looks. They love the books. They love the ambiance. So good to get that kind of icebreaker out of the way. So kind of getting into the questions that relate a little bit more to your presentation. First question we get from Darsh is, what is the difference between clickable and no code prototypes?
Yeah, I would say most often, like, you can build a clickable prototype with no code, but I think the main differentiator there is it's not actually saving data on the back end. Like, you can create a clickable prototype in Figma, but users won't actually be able to input anything. So you can click it, they can't really input any of their data or test that. If you were to build a no code, you don't even really need a back end with Bubble, for example. You could just build the forms in and not save the data and just see whether or not they would fill it out if you're doing user observations and things like that. So I guess not a big difference, but if you have a no code app that you're launching, you'd want to have a backend that would save that user data to their profile or to the database. So most clickable prototypes will just be kind of the UI and no backend functions or things that are going to save data.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a great differentiator, especially for people who might not know about the front end back end interactions. Getting to know the difference between those two are incredibly useful, especially if they only have a very limited amount of time to create a sort of quote unquote a usable product, just like you've mentioned at the beginning of this presentation. So yeah, the next question that we have is from Akshaya. Sorry if I messed up the name, but is the key goal with a prototype to gauge how a user quote unquote feels about the design or focus on the functionality?
I think what you're trying to get, and I mentioned this early on, is people will tell you one thing and lie to you with the best intentions and say like, oh, I love this, I would definitely sign up, right? And one of the things I mentioned about creating doors of opportunity is kind of how do you bridge the gap between what they said they would do and what they would actually do. And there's usually a big difference, not because where people are bad, but just because their motivation is different. Like people want to, oh yeah, I could see myself using that, even your friends. And then if you launch a landing page, like nobody will even go to it, nobody will sign up. And so a lot of times, like if you're using a prototype early on, it's going to be to communicate intent, to gain really an understanding of what the perception is of it. And a lot of times we'll use it to price test and say, hey, based on this prototype, how are you feeling, right? So that's kind of a good question. And then the next one would be, what is this similar to? Like where do you think this would come in as far as price? And you start to understand like how they price anchor to existing subscriptions or existing tools. Where do they see this in the value continuum? So I think it can be to gauge how a user feels, but ultimately you should use your prototype as kind of a means of convincing that you have a valuable problem you're going to solve, and that if they want it solved, they should take an action, whether sign up or, pre-order or whatnot.
Yeah, that's that's seriously such a great perspective and great insight into it. I think that answers the question perfectly. See if anyone has anything to say within the chat. But yeah, I see more and more. I've had misconceptions about this before, but getting to see it in action and getting to see people talk about it is definitely very impressive. Yeah, moving on to the next question from Amish, I believe, is what are the key user parameters you should focus capturing when prototyping, as this is more focused on giving the user a taste of the UI UX without backend development?
Can you clarify what you mean, Amish, by user parameters?
So what I mean by that is once you get your user kind of using your prototype, again, going back to the question that Akshaya had, I was trying to figure out, is there a recipe, for example, for key aspects that you're looking at? When we're looking at, for example, the UX itself, are we looking at how easy it is for the customer to navigate? How, when we're tackling the pain points and addressing them, what are the things that we're looking at basically when they're going through that experience?
Yeah, I think it's really, you want them to confirm that kind of two parts of that user experience. One, that you're bringing them on a journey that's valuable enough for them to continue, right? So that's kind of the, opening a door to, a newsletter or a sign up or something where they vote that way. And then the other side, as you mentioned, is that ease of use and that it's intuitive. So I think, you can use both to be able to do that. In my mind, I think making sure you nail the problem is much harder and much more important, because your user flow you can change pretty easily. But if you have a prototype that's solving the wrong problem, it's not going to really matter how intuitively you do it, because no one's going to be motivated to go through. So I think balancing those two together, of really, as you're in your problem definition, nailing that, who you're solving it for, and then the ease of use becomes easier because you're asking them things that are relevant to that problem, that are relevant and they can understand. I think when there's a disconnect between the problem you're solving and the flow you have in your app, it's usually because something feels off or out of place about the flow. And that can point a little bit to, hey, what problem are we actually trying to solve right now? And does the user know that this is a problem?
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, I think moving on to the next question, I think we have time for maybe two more questions, if that's cool with you, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the first question that we have is, we know you mentioned the R perspective and the ability to kind of break it down into those kind of steps and those kind of categories. I guess the question is quite broad, but hopefully you can create a concise answer from the knowledge bombs you've already dropped. Is, how do we identify whether our app is good enough?
Yeah, I think that goes back to a little bit of the the testing, where you need to solve the right problem, or as close to the right problem as possible. And so getting users to engage and say like, oh, I have that problem, I never thought of solving it that way. Yeah, this feels very intuitive. So a little bit of that qualitative, like, what's the perception of your app? Like, is it a valuable problem? Are you doing it in a good way? And then are people willing to pay for it? Oftentimes, like when we're building stuff, is like people either need to pay with it, money, time, reputation, all of those things. So I think those are good indicators of whether or not your app is quote good enough, because what we found is designers, developers, product folks, we like to really focus on our craft, and we can stay in a room, and that's why getting out of the building is so important. You can stay in a room and talk about all the features that you want to build and dream it up, and really look at all the other apps out there and say, we're going to do everything and it's going to be great and people are going to love it. And then you get in front of a user and they don't engage with it. So I think that pirate funnel and using that to guide you, or metrics similar to that, where you're guiding response, you're guiding actions that they're taking, I think is really good to tell you less about if your app's good enough and more about like if your idea or the problem you're solving is the right one, or like in the right direction.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you've mentioned a lot of the minor points you've brought up already inside your presentation, but still it's so great to hear that kind of just kind of encapsulated in a single statement. So I guess we kind of have three great questions. We have some great questions here that I think the first, obviously, the voted up one, we'll go with that just as our last question. I got to hear a little bit. You dropped a few um, terms such as iMouth Eye. We actually have someone who was part of the iMouth Eye team in Product Buds and inside the chat right now, Joel. But I guess, and also some other VC terms. I said, Andrew has a question. If you have a live wireframe, like by using Figma and InVision, would you consider that enough to demo to VCs and potential investors? What's your experience from your work at Headway, if it's possible to talk about that, or in other categories?
Yeah, I would say, in our experience, the earlier you can talk to investors, the better. And really what they're looking for is, hey, you told us you were going to do this, and the next time you talk to them, did you do what you said you were going to do, right? Or what did you learn since last time you talked to them? So a lot of investors, we'll see talk with, either companies we're working with that we introduce them to, or, just other companies that are applying, where they talk to them, with just an idea. I would say the most important thing for investors to see is traction, really. Like, you kind of have that engagement funnel, like top of funnel, but then also how many people are signing up. And, there's one thing we didn't really talk too much about in here, but can you deliver the value in a manual way, which is like a concierge MVP, where somebody signs up on an app, on a landing page, they sign up, and that goes to a Google Sheet. And then you have a team kind of behind the curtain doing like a Wizard of Oz type approach, while you're providing the value that you said you would. So I think a lot of it, VCs aren't really wowed by great graphics. They might be like, oh, that's nice. I like that. Your branding's, strong, but it's always going to come back to what the market's saying, for investors in our experience. So if you can come with great graphics, great UX, solving the right problem, and you can back that up with user traction, you're going to have a lot more options when it comes to funding, instead of looking for somebody and kind of begging for funds. If you can come with, they're looking to de-risk their investment just like you are, in building, you don't want to build the wrong thing. You don't want to build solve a problem that nobody is going to pay for. So when you go out, focusing on the users first will ultimately then be a better narrative and a better case for why VCs and investors should invest in you.
Absolutely. That is such a great point. And yeah, I think being able to show kind of progress and be able to show what you're able to do and do that white glove kind of treatment is kind of proof. I think from our previous Project Jam cohort of the teams that presented Demo Day, two are actually actively within accelerators now. So it goes to show that things that you come up with within a short period of time, whether that be 3 months or whether it be 3 days, if you can show proof and be able to show vision and kind of that commitment, and what you just mentioned, Andrew, is going to be incredibly important for the long-term success if that's something that people so choose. But yeah, I just want to first of all thank you so much for this experience and the knowledge that you've kind of dropped. And I'm sure everyone just drop down in the chat what you thought, and just want to thank you again for taking the time today, and especially on a Wednesday evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David, and everybody. Good luck to everybody this weekend.